Okay, it's 9 a.m., so we're getting ready to start. I want to welcome everyone to the 10 and Many Voices. We are the only National Park Service site that comes to you. So out of 390 national park sites in the U.S., we ended up in Stevenson, Washington today, and I think we're very glad to be here. We're excited, so thanks for having us. Now, I don't want to waste any more of Bob's time, so I'm going to introduce him. We have Bob Chino here. He's with the National Park Service, and he's going to speak about Dugout Canoes of the Columbia River Plateau, so please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. I just want to make sure all the technology is functioning here. So, first thing, I am the museum curator at Nez Perce National Historical Park, which is located about 8 miles east of Lewiston, Idaho. Lewiston, Idaho is on the Snake River. On the opposite side of the river is Clarkston, Washington. So you can probably guess who came through there in 1804. Our park was established in 1964, and it's kind of an unusual park in the sense that we are made up of disconnected sites in 4 states. There are 38 sites that tell the story of the relationship between Euro-Americans and the Nez Perce people, and the relationship between the Nez Perce and their neighbors. So most of the sites are in Idaho, but some are in Montana, in northeastern Oregon, and in northeastern Washington. We tell the story of the Nez Perce War of 1877, of Oregon Trail immigration, of the missionary era, all sorts of things. The site where our park headquarters is located has been a living site for the Nez Perce people for over 10,000 years. The archaeological record supports that, as well as the tribal history. So, Nez Perce Park is known primarily for its museum collection. We are considered to have the finest collection of Plateau material culture in the world. We certainly have the best documented collection of material associated with families and various traditions on the Plateau and in the Nez Perce community. One of the striking features of our collection is the material culture associated with the introduction and use of the horse. The Nez Perce are noted horse raisers and breeders, have been for over 300 years. They're one of the few tribes that actually practice selective breeding of horses, and they have a reputation throughout the Plateau for taking good care of their horses and having large herds and that sort of thing. Lewis and Clark talked about that at great length when they came down on the Weippe Prairie and came down into the Clearwater Valley and got to know the Nez Perce. Much of this material culture is significant in terms of its age, and we have spent a great deal of time documenting artifacts in, for example, the Spalding collection. I don't know if most of you are from around here. You may remember in 1995 the tribe organized a huge national fundraising effort to bring this collection back from Ohio. This is material that was collected by Henry Spalding in 1836 when he established his mission on Lapwai Creek, sent back to a doctor in Ohio named Dudley Allen, and the material resided there until the 1980s when it was loaned to the Park Service for exhibit at our museum. In 1993, they asked that the collection be returned. People were afraid that they had a buyer for the material, and the Nez Perce, of course, were very upset about this and wanted the material to stay in Nez Perce country. So they raised money to purchase it from the Ohio Historical Society. But for the time prior to the introduction of the horse, people, not just in Nez Perce country, but all over the plateau, traveled the very extensive water highway system of the Columbia Basin and Fraser River, Thompson River basins by boat. When you look at the organization of village life, when you look at family structures, when you look at the studies that ethnographers have done over the years, you begin to understand that settlement and almost all human activity was dictated by the water that was around the rivers, the creeks, the lakes. And so it is a natural thing to understand that people would have developed all sorts of watercraft, and that's true of the plateau. There were hide boats, there were boats made of bark, there were various types of rafts that people made, but the primary means of transportation and the thing that seemed to be most universal on the plateau and throughout the world, in fact, is the dugout canoe. Dugout canoes, as I say, are known worldwide. Nearly every culture on the planet has built them and used them at one time. This is a very interesting one from Vietnam that was recovered a few years ago. Some ethnographers and scientists estimate that people were using dugout canoes as long as 40,000 years ago. When you understand that that was about the time that Australia was inhabited from South Asia and from Southeast Asia, you have to ask yourself, how did people get around to all those islands in the Pacific, and how did they get to Australia? The likely answer is they did it by dugout canoe. Some of the oldest, does that seem like it's in focus to you?
No.
No, it doesn't to me either. Is there any way of getting that in focus?
We're going to be able to think that's a cable problem right now. We're going to have to think that's a cable problem from the computer, a feed problem. We'll have to fix it when we're done.
Are we stuck with it?
Yeah, for now. I
Okay.
don't think I'm going to be able to work on it yet.
Apparently we're stuck with it the way it is. So some of the oldest canoes that have been found in North America have been recovered in Florida. There's an area near Gainesville called Lake Pithlachoco that apparently was what people refer to as a canoe nursery. There are canoes that have been recovered there archaeologically that date back over 8,000 years ago. This is drawings of several of the canoes. There have been over 300 canoes discovered in that one lake in Florida. In the Pacific Northwest, we don't have such a rich archaeological record of canoes, and we're not exactly certain why that is. It may be that we just haven't found them, but it may also be cultural. There may be cultural reasons why there aren't that many. I was talking a little bit ago about the river network. And unfortunately, this just doesn't show up very well because of the thing being kind of out of focus. But this is just the Columbia drainage. This doesn't include up into British Columbia. It doesn't include the Fraser River and Thompson River drainages, which is also part of what they call the Columbia Plateau or the Plateau Cultural Area. So what you begin to see is this huge system of highways, of water highways. And as I mentioned, the canoes were the Chevys, the SUVs, whatever. It's what people use not only to move up and down the rivers, but It's what people use to cross rivers, and people use canoes to trade and to visit with relatives, to go to places where they would then go and hunt and gather in different areas in their seasonal round. I want to talk a little bit about the canoe collection that we have, because this is kind of what got me started in investigating dugout canoes on the Plateau. We own 4 canoes. Actually, we own 3, and the Nez Perce tribe owns 1, and we know of 2 others. One was just recently discovered. These canoes have, these first 2 canoes that I'm going to show you have a fairly long history, not only in terms of the park, but in terms of the area. There are affidavits associated with these 2 canoes, 5047 and 5048 in our museum collection, that date one of them to about the time of Lewis and Clark, and date the other one to the 1830s, because it was made specifically for the missionary Henry Spalding that came in 1836. This is the 2 pictures on the right, and actually the one where the conservation treatment work is being done is the canoe that was built in the 1830s and associated with a number of well-known Nez Perce chiefs that were involved in the construction of it. When I started looking at these canoes in terms of their physical condition and to try to understand their significance in relation to our museum collection and in relation to the region, I wanted also to be able to get an assessment done by a wood conservator as to their physical condition, their state of preservation, and what we could do to keep them from deteriorating, from having their physical condition deteriorate anymore. So we were able to get a grant through the Park Service, through the ethnography program, to fund the assessment, the treatment work, and research to try to understand the significance of our particular collection of 4 canoes. What that did in a nutshell was it took me around the plateau, down in the Willamette Valley, up in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia, over into Montana, southern Idaho, any area where I might find canoes that were made by Plateau people. So far, I have found about 42 canoes in different museums and cultural centers and visitor centers around the Pacific Northwest. And what I do with those is I make scale drawings of them. I measure them and make drawings of them and photograph them and try to gather whatever curatorial information they have that talks about the history of them or who made them or the provenience or whatever. This is another of the canoes that's in our collection. This canoe is actually owned by the Nez Perce tribe. It was given to them in the 1980s. It was originally located in this field in the upper right in the 1960s when they were doing archaeology along the Snake River in preparation for the construction of Lower Monumental Dam. And the archaeologists would walk by it every day, and they finally talked to the landowner. The landowner agreed to give it to the Museum of Native American Culture at Gonzaga University in Spokane, and when that closed down in the 80s, it was given to what's now called the MAC, Museum of Art and Culture in Spokane. But the MAC didn't want this because it was a 30-foot long hunk of wood and they didn't really have any place to put it and didn't know what they were going to do with it. So because it was collected off Nez Perce land, originally they offered it to the tribe. The tribe took it, and our maintenance division went up with the tribe and crated it up and brought it down to the park. And so this is the same canoe undergoing treatment work in 2001. The fourth canoe in our collection is well documented to around 1900. It was made by a man named Silas Lawrence. We used it for fishing and travel on the Clearwater River around 1900. You can see from this picture in the lower right why I was beginning to be concerned about the physical condition of the canoes. There was starting to be splitting and material loss, and I figured if this collection was worth anything, then we had to take some kind of action to stop this material loss. This is a very interesting story. This is a canoe that's located in Helena, Montana. It's owned by the Montana Historical Society. It was made by the half-brother of Chief Joseph Ollicott, who was killed in the 1877 war. And Ollicott and Joseph had family in the Kalispell area of western Montana, and it was made for the family relatives to use there as a ferry prior to 1877. We also have one of only 2 toy canoes that I know of from the Plateau. Now, I want to make it clear that when I talk about the Plateau, I'm not talking about the Northwest Coast. This is a whole different ball game than Northwest Coast canoe culture, because that culture on the Northwest Coast is, as most of you are probably aware, is alive and well. People are making and using canoes, traveling on the rivers, but in the Plateau, that's essentially not the case. The canoe culture has pretty much died out. There aren't too many people around anymore that know how to make canoes, but there is interest, and I think part of that interest has been sparked by the activity on the coast, but also up in British Columbia to revive canoe making and canoe use, and to get a better understanding of how important this was in the culture of the people on the Plateau. And as I say, we have one of the toy canoes. This is the one we have, and I know of one other one that's in the museum in Victoria, British Columbia. But it's a Shuswap canoe. It's a Shuswap toy. And again, just to look at the whole issue of material loss, this picture on the lower right is the stern end of this canoe in 1940, and the same canoe in 1998. This canoe unfortunately spent about 20 years out in the open before it came into the control of the Park Service. So the treatment work involved doing a complete materials analysis, examining the wood structure, mechanical cleaning, as well as stabilization. And what the conservators did was they would mix up a compound, the base of which is this stuff called PVB, polyvinyl butyrate, and they mix it with alcohol, and you can thin it out to the point where you can actually inject it into the wood fibers, and it consolidates the wood fibers. If it's a little thicker, about a 10 or 12% solution, then you can actually use it as a glue to put pieces back together, to glue pieces back together. Another thing they were able to do was to build these different kinds of structures to support the canoes, to keep them from losing their shape anymore that they already had. And if you had sections, like on the right there, you can see where that piece of the gunnel is split. The split runs all the way down pretty much the length of the canoe. So using plexiglass little fittings and bulkheads. You can keep all that material in place so that people can see what the thing looks like, what the shape is, and to preserve the shape. There's very little effort at trying to restore, in other words, put things back the way they were. Another aspect of the research that I've been doing involves historic images. Now, obviously, you're only going to be able to go to a certain point when you're dealing with photography. But one of the interesting things that I've found is that canoes in our particular area were used as late as the 1960s for fishing. These are all photographs taken around the area of our park and are in the historic image collection at our park. So this is, I'm going to just take you on a kind of quick little trip around the plateau from a canoe point of view. As I mentioned, I've been down as far south as Klamath Country, all the way down to the Nevada border, Idaho, most of Washington, the better part of British Columbia, looking at canoes. Most of the canoes that I've found are in some type of cultural center setting, either in a museum or a tribal visitor center or something like that. So all these pictures you see will be mostly indoors. The first stop in relation to where we are is Wanapum country. The Wanapums are cousins of the Nez Perce, as it were, part of the same linguistic family. If you go up to the Dalles, up the river a little ways, you can see this canoe on the left. It's the second largest canoe that I've looked at and documented. It's a little over 33 feet long. And the one on the right is at Wanapum Dam Visitor Center. We know who the makers are of both of those canoes. There are quite a few canoe families among the Wanapum. People still interested in making canoes. The last time we know of people using canoes on that stretch of the Columbia was in the 1950s. This is up in the Okanagan Valley, around Lake Okanagan. You have all these towns that Penticton and Vernon, and nearly every museum up in that area has at least one dugout canoe. These are mostly Shuswap-made canoes from farther north, but also the Okanagans are making canoes as well. These tend to have a fairly clear cutwater. They tend to be a little thicker. Sometimes they have flared sides. They were used in rivers as well as on the lakes. So that accounts to some degree for their shape. A little closer down, up in Coeur d'Alene country, this is a canoe that was collected off of Wolf Creek in the 1940s. Some ethnographers suggested that the Coeur d'Alenes did not even make dugout canoes, but we know that from their own accounts that's not the case. One thing about ethnographies that I learned is you have to pay close attention to who the ethnographer spoke to when they were getting information about the particular culture that they were dealing with. If you talk to somebody who wasn't involved in a particular kind of activity, they would tell you sometimes that people didn't do it or that they didn't know anything about it. The ethnographer would often conclude then that, oh, those people didn't do that. But that's almost never the case. This is one of the archaeological canoes that I was able to see. The Canadian government, the British Columbia government, did what they call the boundary survey in the 1970s. They did archaeological surveys all along the border with the U.S. and Canada, and they found a canoe beaching site that had been submerged, where there were roller logs and about a half a dozen canoes that were in a little inlet of the river, the Kettle River, and they had been submerged when that section of the river was inundated when they finished building Chief Joseph Dam up in northern Washington. Unfortunately, this canoe, when it was put up, it's actually on display on top of an exhibit cabinet. And when they brought the canoe in, the guys that had to get it up on top of the cabinet, there were just two of them working there that day, and they decided that they couldn't lift it, just the two of them. So what they did was they cut it in half and lifted each half. And when I was examining it, it was the curator of the museum walked by, and I asked her why the canoe had been cut in half, and her jaw dropped and her eyes got as big as $50, and she said, "It's cut in half." And so she climbed up on the ladder with me and saw that it had been cut in half. It's unfortunate that that's what happened, but at the same time, it allowed me to get really good measurements to get the cross-section of that canoe. So there's always a silver lining in every cloud. This is a canoe this is a very nice story. This canoe was in the Schaefer Museum in Winthrop, Washington for a number of years, and when I went up to look at it and document it, I talked to the museum about, I said, you know, the Meto people are still around. They're on the Colville Reservation. I said, why don't you give this back to them? So they did. They organized a little ceremony, and it's now on the Colville Reservation, and you can see it in the Tribal Museum on the Colville Reservation. When I was up in British Columbia, I had the very fortunate experience of meeting a couple of people who are involved in the revival of canoe making up there. And this guy on the upper right is Herman Edward, and Gordy Marchand is paddling one of the boats he made. I got the grand tour, learned about the different tools and things that they used in canoe making. Apparently, automobile leaf springs make really good gouges when you work them down. These tools on the lower right are all made from car leaf springs. It's a good quality metal, and they use axes as well as adzes and different kinds of choppers for close-in work. Most of this work is done without the use of burning. I'll talk a little bit about burning because Lewis and Clark talk about burning. So in 2000, they did their first big public activity, and that was what they called Unity Trek, and they paddled from the north end of Lake Okanagan down to Omak, Washington, and met up with the Okanagans that live. There's Okanagans both in British Columbia and in Washington State. So they met up with their cousins in Washington and had a big feast and have been sharing the canoe building knowledge and everything ever since that time. So it's an ongoing activity. This canoe that's highly decorated here is, as you might suspect, is the women's canoe. And they said, no, we're not going to have just some plain looking thing. We're going to have some stuff on ours. So, and the men don't get to go in it. This was a real treat for me, not just to go out and paddle on the lake, but I was amazed that if you have an idea of how important tules plants are to Indian people, there's not a lot of tules left unless you go down in Klamath Country in southern Oregon. But all around the north end of Okanagan Lake, these plants that are growing there, that's all tules. And it was, when I showed these pictures at home, people didn't care so much about the canoes. They said, where are those tules? We want to go up and gather tules. When Lewis and Clark came through Nez Perce country in 1805, they stopped at the confluence of the Clearwater River and the North Fork of the Clearwater. If you look in the blue part of that picture, now there is a thing called Dworshak Dam there that's about 400 feet high. And it's changed the physical nature of this area. But this is the area that Twisted Hair took the Lewis and Clark expedition to, because they were looking for trees they could use to knock down and make their canoes. And this is what the area probably was like prior to Lewis and Clark. It was a known camping area. There's been extensive archaeological work done there that dates the site to thousands of years ago. So it was a well-known place on the river for fishing and for boat building. This is a painting by Nakia Williamson, who's a tribal member. Earlier I showed you some of the sketches that he'd done doing research on horse gear. Lewis and Clark don't say much about the canoes that they built at Canoe Camp. In fact, all they actually do say is they built 4 large canoes and 1 small canoe. And they sometimes refer to the small canoe as their scout. But one of the things that several people have talked to me about, what their boats probably looked like, how big they were, what they were made out of. And so what I've tried to do with the help of other people who are familiar with water travel and canoe making, and particularly rafting and that sort of thing on the Clearwater and Snake River, to try to get an idea of how their boats might have looked. Now these are the 3 basic forms. There's really, I've identified 4 basic forms of canoes that were made up in our area. But this just gives you an idea of what Lewis and Clark saw. You got to remember that these guys were picked because they were competent and capable people. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to adapt in various situations, to take advantage of the local knowledge in different situations. So in order for them to be successful, they had to have those kinds of skills. And when they were there at Canoe Camp in September of 1805, they decided that they were going to leave a certain amount of their gear. They did leave all their horse gear. Twisted Hair's band took care of their horses and their horse equipment for them, saddles and that sort of thing. They also understood at this point, because they talked a great deal with the Indians, the Nez Perce knew the river all the way down to the ocean. They had traveled it many times. They regularly came to Celilo. They knew the people up and down the river. They knew what Lewis and Clark were going to encounter. They told them the number of rapids that they would have to go through and which ones they could probably run and which ones they could portage. Several Indians drew maps for them, and that's one of the maps redrawn by Clark. But they knew what was ahead. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you think about the boats that they made. So what I ended up doing was, everybody says a picture's worth 1,000 words. I ended up making conjectural drawings of what I think the large canoes were like and probably what the small canoes were like. And people often say, the canoes are made out of ponderosa pine. So people say, well, you can't find a ponderosa pine up there now that's big enough to make a canoe 50 feet long. And that's true. Down by the river, you can't. But 200 years ago, you could. And when you think about what they had to put in their canoes, there were 35 people. And they built 5 boats. So on average, you're going to have to put 7 people in each boat. And you're going to have to put, I've made a kind of a partial list of, we don't know exactly what they had left at that time because they didn't keep any kind of running tally of what they were using. But they had desks, they had camping gear, they had all their botanical specimens, they had all the equipment they needed for their firearms, they had surveying equipment. We know they traded for at least 20 bags of camas roots, big bags of roots. So they had a lot of stuff. And they knew they were going to be on the river for about 2 months. They also had the experience of having come from Mandan country to the Rocky Mountains, coming up the Missouri River in canoes that they built. They talk incessantly about how small the canoes were, how they didn't make enough of them. They made eight small canoes, and they were hoping to use this. They made a metal frame boat, and they were going to cover it with elk hides. And by the time they got enough hides to do it, they were out of the area where they could get good pitch to seal the thing up, and so it didn't work. So that was another frustrating aspect for them, that they didn't have this boat. So I think when they got to canoe camp, when they came over Lolo Pass and settled into Nez Perce country to make their canoes, they were determined to make the boats big enough so that they would be able to put all their equipment in and be comfortable enough for the 2-month trip down to the Pacific. So these are the reasons why I think the boats were as big as they are, or as they were. This is a canoe probably about 25 or 30 feet long. This was taken on the Upper Columbia. These are Yakima guys. This canoe is loaded with stuff, and you see where this fellow's sitting. You saw in that one picture of the Wanapum canoes. You see where the guy is sitting in the stern of the boat. Canoes on the Plateau in general were made to be paddled by one person from the stern. And one of the ways you can always tell Indian-made canoes is the physical characteristics of their construction. And in a nutshell, what people did was they'd knock a tree down. The top end of the tree would always be the stern of the boat. The lower end would be the bow. The specific gravity of the wood is such that if you take, say, a 40-foot log, it's going to be heavier on one end than the other. Okay, you want that heavy end to be the bow because somebody's going to be in the stern paddling the boat. So then when you loaded the boat to travel, if it was just one person, you loaded the boat from the center out to the ends. That way the boat was always balanced. And the Nez Perce say that if the boat was well made, it didn't matter whether you were going upriver or downriver. It was just as easy to handle. So when you start putting more people in the boat, you're doing the same thing. You're balancing the load and you're balancing the people. The other characteristic of Indian-made canoes is that they understood about the structure of the tree. The center pith of the tree is not very stable. But the wood just to the outside of that is the strongest wood, so that's what you want to be the floor of the canoe and the lower edges of the sides. So when you look at canoes from the end, you can see whether or not that center section is there in relation to the floor. I don't know if this makes any sense or not, but the problem you always had, once you carved out all that soft wood from the middle and had your firm floor, was the ends. So people used various techniques to solve the problem of the wood deteriorating on the ends. But when you look at the pictures of old canoes and you see that there's material loss and damage, those pictures I showed you, it's almost always on the ends where you had to retain that pith wood from the center of the tree. So these guys get in their Nez Perce style canoes, the Plateau style canoes, and they start paddling down the river. Things are going really great until they start to get to where the Columbia, past where the Snake and the Columbia come together, and the river starts to get a little wider, and you've got gorge winds, and you've got chop and all that sort of thing that you can see out on the river any day. And then these guys they're up against the Washington bank of the river, kind of creeping down, taking it easy. They realize that their boats aren't the best design for that section of the river. The difference between the Nez Perce canoes with their straight sides for the most part, and then you start to get down into Wampum country and the sides are flared just a little bit, they're dealing with the river conditions there. That design is a function of the river conditions that they have to deal with. And when they get down to Celilo and they do this one portage and they come up over the rocks, and Clark sees this canoe that he describes as having a pointed in and flared sides, this is what he's talking about. And they took one look at this and they knew that they wanted these boats. They wanted to have these boats because these boats were ideal for the conditions of the lower Columbia. And as we all know, these boats are also ideal for going out in the ocean. That's what they're made for. So this is the so-called Chinook style cedar canoe with flared sides. This particular one, this is one of the boats that I documented. This is in the Oregon Historical Society collection in Portland, and it's a Quinault made canoe. But I documented it because it was used its entire life on the lower Columbia. But it has those familiar characteristics of lower Columbia boats. And you see what they did. These guys were not artists, by the way. But they illustrated these boats because I think they were so unusual. It was something that they had never seen before. They were very complimentary of the skills that the people had in being able to use these boats on the lower Columbia, regardless of the weather conditions. I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go kind of fast. This canoe is in Walport right now, but it's exactly like a canoe that they described when they were in that area where Portland Airport is now. They came onto an island where there were a lot of plank houses, and they describe 100 boats up on the shore behind the houses. And this is what they're describing. This is a kind of boat that people use to gather wapato. And it was used mostly by women. But if you want to see this boat, you have to go down to Walport, because that's where it is. Don't ask me why. This one is in the Columbia River Maritime Museum. It's a Cathlamet canoe. Probably very similar, but maybe smaller than what Lewis and Clark purchased from the Cathlamet's on their return trip. These are pictures again up in Nez Perce country, historic images of canoes. This guy on the lower right is eel fishing. He's got himself an eel in his dip net there. Things are still being found. This was in 2004. Some scuba divers, and don't ask me why these guys were in Lake Pend Oreille on New Year's Day scuba diving, but that's what they were doing. And they found this boat. So they called the Park Service in to help them document it, and they're still trying to decide what to do with it. But the evidence is all over the plateau that talks about canoe use and how important these things were to people. So this is the end for me. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer your questions.
Yeah, we could take maybe 1 or 2 questions, but let's do it.
If you want to look at some of the drawings, I have some of the drawings up here that I've made. I have about 25
You
of them.
didn't talk about the macaw and their canoes.
I didn't talk about the macaws because I was talking about the plateau. And the macaws are on the coast. I'm very sensitive about the macaws because my museum technician, Linda Pisano, that works with me at the park, is macaw. She's married to a Nez Perce, but she's a Williams. She's a Williams. And so I pay pretty close attention to what the macaws do. I've been out to Nia Bay several times. And, yeah.
Okay, well, I think, yeah, you could do 1.
I apologize, I got here late, and if you've already talked about this, please forgive. But several times in the journals they refer to pulling over to dry out the canoes and to pitch them, and I'm not quite sure I understand what the difficulty is, especially it seems like down in the Cathlamet area or Longview area they had to pull over to make their canoes water-worthy once again. Can you give a little bit of insight to that?
Well, a lot of times when canoes are made, the trees are taken down and then they're allowed to set for a while to kind of cure, and then the boats are made. But what Lewis and Clark did was when they cut the trees, and within 10 days they had all 5 of their canoes made. So I think what was going on was the wood was splitting in places, and they were using pitch mixes to make repairs, to seal the cracks.
Okay. Well, we're about out of time, so you're going to have to grab Bob in the back of the tent if you have more questions for him. But let's give him a round of applause and thank you for coming today.
Thanks.